So, welcome to the Leader Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Joel Brown. Today's guest is actually new to me, so I want to really get to know him a little bit better, in the context of this podcast as well. This is Laz Ranasinger, and we connected on LinkedIn, and I invited my audience there to check out my podcast. And actually, he reached out to me really quickly soon after I'd sent out that invitation, and he said, hey, actually, congrats, on launching the podcast. He really liked the concept, especially this idea around stepping outside of traditional paths, and it resonated with him as a fellow physician. And he's actually based in the UK, where I did most of my training and where I was settled for most of my life until I relocated to Ontario. And he mentioned that he thought his story could work in the context of conversations with people who've really kind of stepped out. So rather than telling you what he told me, I really want to kind of invite him to share a bit of his background, what he was doing before, what he's doing currently, what invited that curiosity to step out into this space of uncharted territory where physicians are making bold decisions to get off the beaten, clear path that everybody says you're supposed to be on. So I'm fascinated to hear more. Laz, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me, Joel.
You're very welcome. So yeah, just start with a little bit of like your story, so we get a bit of context before we jump straight into some of the kind of technical changes and decisions you made more recently.
Of course. So right now, I'm a doctor based in London. I'm an anaesthetics trainee. And if we sort of rewind right back to the start, I grew up in Norfolk in the east of England, the son of Sri Lankan immigrants, and I basically ended up going to London for medical school. My parents are both doctors. I'd always had basically some sort of interest in what they were doing, and it was something that felt very natural to me to go into medicine. And then, whilst I was in medical school, I really enjoyed my time there, made some of my best friends, and then continued working in London thereafter. And essentially, the context of me appearing on the podcast this time around is actually not directly relevant to medicine, so to speak. It's actually related to this sort of extracurricular side quest that I've embarked on in the last couple of years. So I love my job. I love what I do in anesthetics, or anesthesiology, I think is how you call it on your side of the Atlantic. But I did feel like having some diversity in your life and in your career in terms of your interests really helps you enjoy everything a lot more, if that makes sense. So instead of being bogged down by my medical work, I liked having something outside medicine that I could work on in a longitudinal sense. It's a project that can never really be completed, and something that I can continue to work on throughout the rest of my life. And one thing that I found is having that has made me enjoy my day job even more, and it's sort of complementary. I feel like too much of any one thing can be a little bit mind-numbing in some sense. So having that variety has really been a huge blessing, really, in my life. So nutrition is something I stumbled upon quite by accident, to be honest. I read Chris Van Tilliken's book, Ultra Processed People, just because one of my housemates at the time happened to have it in the house. And when I read that, I just felt this switch almost click inside me, where I essentially realized that after 6 years of medical school, several years of postgrad training, doing a bunch of exams, I knew how to deal with a lot of the consequences of poor diets and poor nutrition, such as the diabetes, the hypertension, the heart disease, whatever else it may be. I felt well trained to be able to deal with those consequences. However, I didn't really have much knowledge about how to actually address the causes. So despite all of that training, I hadn't actually had an awful lot of training in the field of nutrition. And I think that's something that many medics of my generation would say. It seemed like a pretty big oversight in the way that medical schools teach at the time that I was there. And hence, that's why I developed an interest in this. I wanted to read more and more and actually understand how we ended up in the situation that we're in right now, where there are rising rates of diet-related disease across the world. And it's something that I think should be of interest to most healthcare workers, because I think we have a part to play in trying to change the course of the future, basically, from this point onwards.
It's fascinating. I think this speaks to me particularly because when you consider the line of work that you do, what some may describe as your day job, you're putting people, healthy people usually, to sleep, so that they can have operations done on them to address. Sometimes those are the results of, well, let's say otherwise healthy people. They have to be relatively stable, but they have a health problem that needs to be addressed. And then how you've ended up pivoting to do something alongside that and then addressing nutrition. It can seem like such a dichotomy, but yet that's okay. And that's part of what I try to emphasize in some of the engagements when I talk about careers and interests that we have, that it's okay to have that permission to embrace what may seem to be diametrically opposed passions. Just because someone puts you in a box and says, or you're a sleep medicine doctor or you're an aesthetic doctor, nutrition is somehow outside the realm of what what should be attractive to you or what you should pursue. And that's not necessarily the case at all. It's interesting that it, as you said, you somewhat stumbled upon it, accidentally read a book that then opened up a rabbit hole that has turned into this incredible passion.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, in particular, especially in this day and age when there is so much information that's so widely available, I think it's possible to actually get yourself quite clued up about topics that aren't necessarily within your subject area. I think it's a bit narrow-minded for us to basically typecast ourselves as, an anesthetist or a gastroenterologist or whatever, and think that we need to sort of stick completely within that remit. Of course, these terms exist for a reason and we have certain roles and responsibilities, but I do think there's opportunities out there for us to broaden our horizons, learn more about whatever topic may interest us, and then see how we can use that knowledge and leverage that knowledge to help other people. I think that's exactly what I'm hoping to do. From a nutrition perspective, I know that there's definitely going to be skilled nutritionists and dietitians out there who may feel, I'm not entirely sure how to word it, but I imagine they feel like their speciality should remain gate-kept to some extent. And I understand where they're coming from. They have a really important role to fulfill. But specifically in the context of nutrition, I think it's just one of those things that literally affects every single human being on Earth. And I think as healthcare professionals, we should take it upon ourselves to actually understand this as much as possible, because as doctors we do care a lot about which medications go into our patients' bodies. We should also think about what they're consuming elsewhere. So I completely agree with you. That's why I think I really took to the post that you shared on LinkedIn about this podcast, about the idea of broadening horizons and taking slightly unconventional paths, so to speak, because I completely agree it can completely change and enrich your life in many ways.
Yeah, a couple of things stand out to me. So you mentioned that you're on the training program. Are you doing it less than full time, or how do you manage your time to accommodate building this parallel career in nutrition and fitness?
Sure. So, I'm not actually doing it less than full time. I'm still working full time at the moment, and I'm currently at CT3 level. So, just to convey that to a Canadian audience, essentially anesthetics training in total will probably take about 8 or 9 years. So, I'm about 3 years through. So, I'm relatively early on. The good thing in some sense is that the anesthetics work schedule includes quite a lot of on-call shifts. I'm not sure what the parallel term would be in Canada, but it means that I do night shifts, I do long day shifts, and the benefit is that means that you do get days off during the week to try and compensate for that. So I've actually found that schedule works quite well for me, because once I'm at work, I don't mind being at work for 13 hours. However, if it means that I get a day off at some point during the week time, I find that that's easier for my mentality, essentially, just to switch completely into pursuing these additional hobbies. And from a life perspective, I mean, at the moment, I live in a one-bed flat. I don't have any kids. I don't have too many other things vying for my attention. So it feels like the perfect time to try and really dig deep into this passion of mine and see what I can make of it. So I think a lot of it's just to do with having time and not having too many things competing for that time, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that really makes sense. And like you said, you pick the time, you pick the season of life where being able to intentionally birth and cultivate this interest and connect yourselves with the right people to be able to grow this parallel career is quite key. Something that jumped out to me as well. What was it? What was the How was this received by some of your other colleagues? In anesthetics, whether that those who are helping in training you, or sort of colleagues alongside you. I just wonder because sometimes there can be a sense in which, in traditional medical settings, people who pursue outside interests are sort of seen as distracted, maybe.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. So I've been very lucky that the departments I've worked in thus far have been incredibly supportive of everything I do in the realms of nutrition. I think for a lot of people, the connection between anesthetics and nutrition, well, it doesn't seem like there is a connection, to be honest, between anesthetics and nutrition. They're just about as far apart as they seemingly could be on the medical spectrum. However, my counter argument is that anesthetics, a lot of it, even though to the average person it comes across as, us just putting people to sleep, it does involve you understanding physiology extremely well, so understanding how the body works under normal conditions, and part of that includes metabolism. We need to learn how our body uses energy, and I think nutrition can be a sort of natural follow-up to that. So I do still think there's links between anesthetics and nutrition. And the other thing I really love about nutrition as a topic is that it's relevant to absolutely everyone. So I've done departmental sessions before where I've been speaking in front of my entire anesthetic department, where I've basically been delivering my main sort of flagship talk titled Beyond Calories, which goes through some of the key points that I've learnt during my deep dives into the world of nutrition. And I've always been extremely impressed by how engaged all of these various anaesthetists are. Because realistically, every single human being does eat food every single day. And hence, providing them with advice or principles that they can put into action that can help them live happier and healthier lives, it's something that I find pretty much any audience I'm stood in front of will be quite engaged with that type of material. So I've been very lucky. I think nowadays actually it isn't quite as off-piste for people to pursue things that are adjacent to their main careers. There's friends of mine who are in professional bands alongside being an anaesthetist. There's plenty of people who have these extracurricular activities, which I think will really add so much value to their lives. And actually, many of them agree with me in saying that having these additional passions really make them enjoy their work even more. So to answer your question, I've been very fortunate that, generally speaking, the people that I've worked with so far have been super supportive and super inquisitive about what I'm doing.
Right. That's awesome. Thank you for just, yeah, explaining that so well. And you're, yeah, as you said, I think quite blessed to be in an environment that is not hostile towards your passion and interest in
Absolutely.
developing something, especially something that might not be perceived as immediately, considered within the realm of what anesthetic
Yeah,
doctors are okay to also pursue. But you're
exactly.
totally right that nutrition should be considered central to any conversation about well-being. Now, you mentioned you've done evidence-based talks beyond calories
Mhm.
at conferences. I'd love if you just could unpack a little bit about what exactly this career in nutrition and fitness is looking like as it relates to the product or the services that you're hoping to offer. And yeah, so that's the first part of the question, and there'll be another part. So I'll let you get a chance to respond to that.
Sure. So to be honest, at the moment, I'll be totally honest in saying I don't have a grand plan in place at the moment, because
Great.
I do. Yeah, I mean, I think that's quite a nice position to be in, where I
Yeah.
mean, I have a steady income from my day job, and I have a little bit of time to work on this passion of mine. And I think fundamentally, I'm driven by this mission, almost, where I feel like there's this world around us which is increasingly departed from the type of world that we as human beings are meant to be living in, especially from a food context. We see in whichever country we go to, we see ultra processed food all around us.
Yeah.
And hence, I feel that I've had the privilege of, having time, having an education, having the resources to be able to dig deep and understand what's going on, and basically adjust my diet to improve my health. And I know that there's a lot of people out there who either don't have the time or the money to be able to do that. And so at present, I kind of want to build some sort of platform which allows me to communicate with as many people as possible about how food is affecting us. Because what I've found is there's plenty of really fantastic researchers who have done unbelievable work to help uncover this reality that we're living in, where the food environment completely goes against our evolved biology. And at present, there are more and more people on social media platforms who are communicating these concepts, but I still think it's far from being widely appreciated. So at present, my only aim is to try and make as many people as possible aware of how human nutrition should actually work. And that in itself is a whole nother conversation. I have 3 specific principles that I talk about in Beyond Calories. So that talk is designed to be only about half an hour long, and I go into it with the knowledge that nutrition is a bit of an abstract concept. It's one of those topics that reaches several different realms. There's a part of it which is very scientific and biochemical, talking about macronutrients, micronutrients, and whatnot. There's a part of it which is very social and economic in terms of what food do people actually have access to. And then there's a whole part of it which is behavioral and psychological. So it's one of those things that's very difficult to create a one-size-fits-all approach. But I think it's a topic that is prone to having loads of misinformation strewn all over the place. A lot of the time it's driven by the food industry, it's driven by certain ulterior motives in terms of promoting supplements or fad diets, etc. And I think the doctor part of me as well, we all said this when we said the Hippocratic Oath, it's all about trying to basically do what's good for your patients, for the population around you. And I think our food environment is one of the biggest challenges we're going to face in our generation, and I'm going to do whatever I can to spread the word about its harms and how we can actually go about improving things for ourselves and for the people around us.
That's amazing. Laz, one of the concepts I keep coming back to, as you're familiar with the idea of ikigai. It's pretty
I thought you might say that.
Yeah, it's one of these Japanese concepts, and a way of framing the ways to approach figuring out your purpose in life and figuring out what it is and your mission, what it is that you could or even dare I say should be doing. What you just described about how important nutrition is as something missional, as something that you discovered even in your training as a doctor. You felt, and I would completely agree with you, I harken back to my days in medical school where there was a sense in which nutrition is very secondary, if not tertiary. It's a bizarre that it really did not feel very central to the core of our training and understanding, yet we were expected to know so much about physiology and pathology.
Yeah.
Other end of finishing med school, and I work in primary care, and so much of the illness and disease that we see is driven by poor nutrition, whether that's poor nutrition because of a lack of access to healthy nutrition, or choosing to engage in basically in malnourishment. And yet the world, as you said, we're saturated by messages that would have us almost ignore the fact that our nutrition is nutrition is so important.
Exactly.
And as you said, the options that are most readily available to us are oftentimes and most affordable, oftentimes very unhealthy for us. And so the world needs better advice on nutrition.
Yeah, better information.
Yeah, absolutely. Better information. Well, as you said, there is this dearth of information, but what you bring as someone who is very, very astute, you're obviously physiology wise, you're also someone who understands the human body in its most vulnerable state and are able to support people when they are under extreme stress and duress, in the sense of when someone is having an operation. As an anesthetic doctor, you are very, very, you got your finger on the pulse, literally, of everything going on in the person's body, and being able to support it when it when it is completely vulnerable to whatever is going on at that moment in time. And you're now saying, hey, while I'm building this career, I want to bring to bear how important nutrition is, and why for everyone this is something that should be so central. I want to really kind of demystify this, break this down, make it accessible, make that information. And also, you bring credibility to, because that's also an important thing as well. There's a lot of not to discount anyone else's contribution to bringing information, but I think it does matter when someone like yourself is also trying to show the evidence basis, and that this is not just okay, this is information that you can also demonstrate, good evidence to support. So I think it just reminds me that being able to find something that the world needs, and that serves a greater purpose, is such an important signal for being able to figure out, hey, yeah, this is something that recognize it. And as you said, it might not necessarily be that you end up making it's immediately clear how much money you're going to generate from this. It's, as you said, it is something that you realize you have the opportunity and the time to be able to make a contribution towards. There's also nothing wrong with you being able to build some kind of business and to be compensated for it in the process, and you can figure that out in terms of, I'm sure there are ways that could unfold. But
Of course.
you said at this stage you're making enough income from your work as an anesthesiologist to not have to focus on the financial remuneration aspect at this point in time. But it's been certainly, as I said, I've enjoyed hearing how you've thought about the why behind doing this, and how you're going about it at this particular point, and that there's no grand sort of glorious sort of plan of this is exactly where I want to go just right now. You're just sort of building it, and that's
Exactly.
as well. I'm
Yeah,
really, really
exactly. And I also think, just from an impact perspective, I think at the moment we live in an era where, on social media, for example, there'll be people who have millions and millions of influencers who they can influence in positive or negative ways. And I think we sometimes lose sight of when we can make very impactful influence on a smaller number of people. So one thing that I found deeply gratifying in the work that I've done so far is when, for example, the theatre nurses who I've worked with, who've heard my talk, come back and tell me weeks later that they've reduced their ultra-processed food intake, they're feeling much better, they've really taken on board a lot of the principles that I've told them about, and those kinds of tiny sort of shifts in people's mentality can actually make a massive difference in the long run when you scale it up across the course of a lifespan. So that's why nutrition, it's one of those things that I'm not really even really thinking about how this can be monetized as of yet. I completely appreciate that if it's something that's taking up more of my time, I also need to think about that aspect of things in terms of my own sort of personal maintenance. However, I just think it's one of those areas of interest which is just a win-win, because hypothetically, even if I try and make it on social media and not a single person aside from my parents follow me, I will still have benefited from everything that I've learned, because in the last 2 years my nutrition has been better than it ever has before, and I've really reaped the benefits of that, just in terms of my sort of mental health, my physical health. All of that is as good as it can be now, thanks to this exploration of nutrition that I've done. So I try and share those principles with as many people as I can, just because I know from lived experience just how impactful it can be and just how much it can improve your life. But yeah, that's why this feels very much like a win-win scenario. It's not the type of thing that I'm going to ever really give up, because for me personally, in terms of how I live my life, I put those principles into practice every single day. So that's one other thing that I think is super, super beneficial, or something that I've really gained a lot from with regards to nutrition and fitness being my area of interest.
What I'd love to hear from you now, Laz, if you don't mind, just just giving me some thoughts about this. What do you feel this journey that you've taken and you are still on has taught you about leadership in the sense of your own life as well as your own career, as opposed to necessarily focusing on leading others, though there is also that as well, because you're I'd love for you to speak to that, leading others in their in a
Yeah.
better understanding of their nutrition and why that's important, but just lessons on leadership along the way.
So that's a really interesting question, I think, especially in the context. I like the way that you phrased that in terms of sort of your own life, because that is an interesting way of thinking about it. You are sort of the leader of your own life. I think one thing nutrition has really taught me, this might just be a consequence of me just getting a little bit older, but in the past, I've always been someone who's quite enthusiastic about things. Yeah, and what I mean by that, that sounds like a vague statement, but essentially what I'm saying is there'll be plenty of things that I'm interested in, and I seem to be doing all of them sort of 60%, if that makes sense. I think that was partly driven by indecision and partly driven by not really finding the thing that, well, my ikigai, so to speak. And I think what this has taught me is the benefit of really knuckling down and focusing on one thing in particular. And that's not necessarily at the expense of other things. I still do things that I enjoy. But my point is, there was a point in my life a few years back when I was really spinning lots of plates. Many of them weren't necessarily making me happy, but I just felt this urge to be toxically productive in some sense. And I found that it was just wearing me out. I wasn't really looking forward to any of these things anymore. I think, on platforms like LinkedIn, I'd certainly be, speaking about it quite positively, but that's the reality of these kinds of platforms, is that there's a lot going on behind the scenes that people don't see. And I think I felt in many ways a bit burnt out because there were a bunch of projects which felt like they were kind of running away from me. I didn't necessarily feel that invested in any of them, and I don't think I was really committing as much as I could have committed to to any one of them, really. So I think what this has really taught me is the benefits of focus and not feeling the need to spin too many plates all at the same time, and also just acknowledging that you don't need to be 100% productive 100% of the time. That's a narrative that I've often found myself slipping into. I'm one of those people who struggles to just, sit on the couch and watch TV. But in the last couple of years, I think, especially from, I know I keep going back to this, but especially from prioritizing things like my nutrition, my sleep, my exercise, I've started to really appreciate the basics, essentially. Because a few years back, that wasn't me whatsoever. If there was any sort of project of some form that I was involved in, I'd be doing that 24/7 at the expense of my nutrition, my sleep, my exercise, and my mental health as a consequence. So if I were to try and answer your question a bit more succinctly, I know I just went on a bit of a tangent, but what I've learned is the benefit of keeping things simple, focusing on a relatively small number of passion projects that really interest you, and essentially being able to say no to things that aren't going to interest you quite so much. I think that's one of the biggest lessons I've learned.
I don't think any of what you said was tangential. You spoke very eloquently to the point, and actually, it challenged me because I relate to the problem, or the how you describe that tendency to have lots of things. And part of what I've been trying to do with this project, with this conversation, is to have conversations with people who there is a sense in which we are multi-hyphenate, but sometimes identities can be reductive in the sense that you're an anesthesiologist or an anesthetic doctor. That's
Yeah.
that's the entirety of who you are. Anything else is sort of a distraction. And so, but there is this tension because multi-hyphenate people with multiple interests, who, there can be the other swing where you just divide yourself into too many
Of course.
compartments, and then you're sort of pursuing too much all at the same time.
Yeah, jack of all trades, master of none.
Right. And as a family doctor, I relate to that even within my specialty, because we have to know a little about a lot of things rather than many specialties where you're kind of trained to focus on a narrow spectrum and you specialize. So I am a generalist, both as a physician, but also in terms of my interests. There are things that, that multiple things that I'm doing. But I think What I'm still taking from what you're saying is that focus is also about being able to say, you know what, there are many things I could be doing, but how do I decide in this particular season of my life which things deserve more focused effort, and perhaps some other things I may decide later on I can
Exactly.
devote some more time to that when in a different season. So what I've been also trying to do is map out my life a little bit and think about seasons and times. Okay, maybe next year I know that I want to take a trip to go to France or to Montreal. So let's do find
Yeah.
place in this side of the world, and therefore, I want to dust up, I want to improve my French. So maybe in the 3 months before the trip I can say, okay, I'd like to focus on French, and maybe hire a tutor or someone to help to pick up my French. So that hobby, I can kind of decide I will postpone trying to learn French right now when there's other things that I'm doing. And really, it's stuff we know, but it's just being a bit more intentional and particularly focused at what is the best way to use my time. Think about your time like an investment portfolio. Where am I going where is it best to put the money that is going to help to that bring the best investment, so that the reward of that is most winsome and most useful at the same time.
That's a really good analogy. I like that.
Yeah, no, thank you. But then the other point you made is so simple and so essential. We don't have to be productive 100% of the time. We don't have to think about everything that we're doing as in what is the immediate reward. In fact, sometimes the reward is just the joy of just that experience in the moment. Sometimes, and actually, interestingly, even when we think about rest, and just taking some time off, some downtime, watching some television, and not feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm not reading another paper or getting doing something else. As physicians, we often feel like, yes, there is something that we have to be doing to prove how good we are. It's rest is such a key
Exactly.
space and place where, and actually a lot of productivity happens that's behind the scenes. The brain is, I'm sure you could tell us a lot more about what happens. In fact, give us a minute of what happens in rest from your point of view physiologically, just to help us to know that there's so much good that happens when we're asleep in terms of physiologically. Tell us.
Of course. So I'll start off by saying I'm certainly not a sleep expert by any means, but I did read a wonderful book called Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker, which I would recommend to, well, anyone who sleeps. The only disclaimer is that when you read that book, it'll initially slightly freak you out because it makes you realize just how important sleep is, and the vast majority of us don't get enough of it. But I'd say a good example from my own life recently is that I had to sit the first half of the anesthetic postgraduate exams, which are known for being quite rigorous. But one thing that I did well in the preparation for this exam is that I really didn't lose sight of the basics, because quite often, because of the stresses of sitting an exam, you basically stop doing all of your normal sort of human bodily functions. Your human maintenance just goes completely out the window. You eat badly, you don't exercise, and you don't sleep. All of that is just so bad for forming any sort of memories. And that's essentially what you're doing when you're trying to revise for an exam, is to consolidate all of these tiny nuggets of knowledge and have them there in an accessible state for you to present them either in the context of a written exam or, as was the case for me, in a Viva scenario where some examiner is asking you all sorts of questions about various niche things. And I think what I found was I had a really clean diet for the 6 weeks or so leading up to the exam. Literally didn't eat the tiniest shred of ultra processed food, and I was trying to stick as sort of rigorously as possible to just generally healthy whole foods, eating decent portions of fish with all the omega-3s and whatnot. I was just doing quite basic things, to be honest. It's the advice that everyone gives you before exams that everyone ignores about sleeping enough, exercising, and eating well. But essentially, what happens is exercise as well can basically affect the blood flow through the brain. It can help your focus later on in the day. And I personally find that even if I spend 1 hour in the gym in a given day, some people may view that as me losing 1 hour of revision. But in my head, I sort of think of my subsequent 3 hours of revision as being twice as efficient. And that's
Mm.
something that's been proven time and again, is that exercise is good for clarity and focus. It's also good for just your mental well-being and seeing the task ahead, sitting an exam in perspective, really. So I know that's not a particularly specific answer to your question, but I basically ran that as my own sort of human experiment, just seeing how much of a difference it would make if I were to just prioritize the basics. And it was probably the best exam I've ever sat before. And I think that's largely to do with how I prepared from a sort of human maintenance perspective.
Yeah, no, thank you for explaining that. I'm sorry if I put you on the spot. It's only because how often do you get an anesthesiologist, someone who's actually putting people to sleep on a regular basis to talk about actually, the sort of the unseen benefits of sleep?
Of course, of course. Our anesthetic sleep is probably a little bit rougher than a good quality night's sleep.
That is true. Thank you. Thank you for putting us in perspective there. Laz, it's been honestly just great, just hearing you just talk from the heart. This whole conversation has been, and you can attest to that, has been unscripted. I've not sent you questions or said you had to. It was just a nice flow of conversation because I just wanted to just come from the heart and for my audience to be able to just get an appreciation of your story, your journey as you're figuring out this thing we call a professional life, and at the same time you don't have to have it all figured out. It's very clear to me that you're a very intelligent and very thoughtful and very passionate human being, and that the world will be a better place because of the contributions you make. I would love for my audience to be able to follow you on social media in whatever platform, and to be able to find out more about if they are interested in coming along to one of your talks beyond calories at any future events, if there is a mailing list or a way to follow you so that we can just keep on the path of figuring out more about your journey. That'd be great if you could
Of
speak to that,
course.
or you can send me any links you got.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll send that through, but I can be found on almost every platform: Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok recently,
Yeah.
YouTube, and also I've got a Substack mailing list. So my name's fairly unique. I think if you Google it, there's probably not going to be many others out there with the same names. So I'll send the links through, but I don't think I'll be very hard to find.
Awesome. I will certainly add it to the show notes. So thank you so much for your time and your insight, and just telling us what leadership means to you. Thank you, Laz.
Thank you so much for having me, Joel.